It's time to delve into the great bargain bucket of microcomputer ports once again. What shall we find? Something's interesting, no doubt, because, well, there always is. Especially after the last time we did this. Plenty of commenters put some interesting choices into the mix, some that I'd never even heard of before. Thanks to that, my own research, and the exploits of various other cool channels like Zeusdaz who have spent time compiling these things, I've got plenty more ports to play. And, even if they mostly aren't good, they're certainly intriguing. Let's kick things off then with a NES classic from Konami. Ah, the almighty original Castlevania. Still one of my absolute favourite 8-bit platformers. Even though there's been so many awesome entries in the series and it evolved so much, I still get a right kick out of the very first game. And quite clearly, it's best experienced on the NES. However, that didn't stop people from trying to take the game's unique brand of vampire hunting elsewhere, and in 1990 a rather obscure company, named Unlimited Software, made a conversion of the game for the Commodore 64. I'm sure that already people are lighting their pitchforks and sharpening their stakes in anticipation of evisceration. But, it's actually more of a mixed bag. Castlevania on the C64 isn't actually as bad as you might think. The play is occasionally rough around the edges, particularly in the collision department, but mostly it's not too bad. It moves quickly enough too, and it's quite responsive. However, there are some issues. The presentation is somewhat lousy, particularly the god-awful music. You would hope to hear a much better recreation of Vania's almighty music than this on the SID, that's for sure. And if you so happen to be playing on a European machine, I hope you like it slowed down. It's not pleasant. Some people really don't like this one, it has to be said, but I don't hate it, in all honesty. I mean, if you want a really terrible port of the original game, go check out the Amiga version. That absolutely stinks. This could certainly be improved in some areas, but the actual play is mostly fine. Castlevania got off pretty lightly as far as Konami ports from the NES goes. Some others didn't. If you were a C64 owner and you were stuck with that computer's version of Metal Gear, also by Unlimited Software, well, I can only offer my sympathies. This is of course an interesting case already. The original Metal Gear started out on the MSX, where it's a great game and stealthy pioneer. More people probably played it on the NES, but that port features unnecessary additions, ropier gameplay, awful translation, and is generally a much worse experience. And then you have this, which is the C64 port of the NES version. Here we have reached the very bottom of the poll, home of unarguably the worst thing ever to come out with the Metal Gear name on it. Once again we have a miserable job on music. Oddly, it seems like a lot of these bad C64 ports from the USA have this common problem where they were utterly clueless on how to work the SID chip, and this is far from the worst offender. The play is as juddery as all hell movement-wise, with no real indication as to whether you're causing enemies any damage or whether you've set off alarms or much of anything really. But the worst thing is the load times. This game loads after basically every screen, and often for quite a while. Almost immediately this becomes unbearable when even the next screen of jungle takes well over 10 seconds to bloody appear. Imagine if every flick screen game was like this, seriously. As low quality as the port is, these load times are truly what make it awful and borderline unplayable. But hey, at least the translation's mostly fixed. No truck have started to move here. That makes it all worth it, doesn't it? Course not. This is utterly appalling. So, who's everyone's favourite fat fire-breathing Russian? I mean, that's obvious, surely, because there's only one Karnov. He's the titular star of a Data East game that may be a bit weird. Well, very weird, but is generally pretty decent. The 8-bit home computer version would be handled by Electric Dreams, a UK offshoot of Activision. Generally dependable folks too. They certainly put the best minds to work on R-Type, that's for sure, the result being one of the best 8-bit micro ports. Now if you played Karnov on the Spectrum, well, it's not R-Type, but it's not bad either. One of those games with big thick borders around the sprites to prevent colour clash. The scrolling isn't too hot, seeing as it's on the Spectrum, and horizontal scrolling was never too hot there unless Joffa Smith was on the case, but it's fine enough. Naturally, you would look to the C64 for a better Karnov experience, seeing as it's a side-scroller. The C64 tends to handle this sort of game a lot better than the Specky does. But oh boy, you'd be disappointed. The lazy bastards in charge of Karnov's C64 port decided to do the worst thing possible, a direct port of the Spectrum Karnov to the C64. Why is this such a bad thing to do? Well, it doesn't use any of the C64's advantages in this department. The dedicated graphics chip, the VIC-2, it may as well not exist. This runs with software only, meaning that how it runs depends purely on processor speed. And guess what? The Spectrum Z80 clocks faster than the C64's MOS 6502. So guess what? Not only is this just the Spectrum version of Karnov, it also runs way slower. What an utterly contemptible, bone idle, lazy as all hell effort that defies all logic. Yes, you should probably just stick to the NES version. Last time we did one of these videos, we looked at Chase HQ, a game that's generally very nice and playable on most of the micros, with the rather shocking exception of the C64. And here we have another port of the same ilk. Most of the micros will give you a really good version of Super Hang-On. It's awesome on the Amiga and Atari ST, where using the mouse to control a bike actually works great, and it's also very decent on the Spectrum where, beeper engine noise aside, it punches well above its weight. Pretty good on Amstrad too, even if it is monochrome. But then there's the C64 version and it's like, what the bloody hell happened? You don't expect the Commodore to get such a shaft in. This port is just so strange. To be honest, it hardly feels like Super Hang-On at all. You've got music that's completely different, not bad, but completely different. A bike that doesn't even look close to the one from the arcade, and a game that's, not exactly intense. You couldn't call it frustrating, I suppose. Super Hang-On on C64 is shockingly easy, with only the odd bit of light drifting between bikes to do every so often, and the occasional turn here and there. You could almost relax with this game. But yeah, I don't see how it's a Hang-On game at all, quite frankly. It feels like it was some other bike game that was already in the works but was switched to a Hang-On port halfway through. It seems as though paying customers thought very little of it, to the point where the game was prematurely yanked off of the shelves due to getting such a negative reaction. Harsh? Maybe, but it's certainly fair. Super Hang-On on C64 may be weird and bad. Chase HQ may also be pretty bloody rubbish. However, the worst is yet to come. Those games are utterly angelic compared to the C64 version of Cisco Heat. Now, Cisco Heat isn't a very well remembered coin-op these days, although it was quite advanced and smooth for its time. It's a very busy scalar arcade, and I dig it. It's worth lingering on this original arcade, in fact, just to see how it handles the turns and so forth. And also because I want to prepare you for the C64 version. Because, well, in the words of Murphy, you may not like what you're going to see. In the words of the almighty Lord Voltar, Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This port was released by Imageworks in late 1991 at around about the same time the company's owner fell off a yacht, and it is beyond the pale. There's no way this could even be called finished. Just look at those sprites and how they move. It's literally blocks coming down the road. The turns in the road have never been handled worse in any racing game. I really cannot believe this one. For someone to produce this on the C64 in 1991 with a system that's almost 10 years old is abhorrent. I don't like to go straight in on a programmer, but it's kinda clear that whoever made it didn't give a solitary fuck about it. I mean, maybe they had good reason not to give one, who knows? Maybe they'd sneaked a look at Robert Maxwell's bank account and didn't much like what they saw. Either way, you have to look really hard to find a port this bad on the C64. I dare say it may be the worst port of the lot on the system, in fact. Oh, and it cost over a tenner too. Over 15 if you bought it on disc, for what Imageworks had the temerity to call the most thrilling and realistic racing simulation ever to be seen on a home computer. I want whatever drugs the person who wrote that sentence was clearly on, because this is, bluntly put, utterly catastrophic. I can think of only one other C64 arcade port that's on the same level as Cisco Heat. You have to reach pretty hard to find something that's even close, but I've managed it. I speak, of course, of Ikari Warriors. Now I'm sure some of you are quite shocked and wondering if I have totally lost my marbles, because obviously your mind has turned to this version of the game by Elite, the same folks who did Commando. Now, quite obviously I am not talking about this. Elite's Ikari Warriors is rock hard, but clearly awesome. Which you would expect, seeing as it was coded by John Twiddy, who went on to do The Last Ninja for System 3. That's quality. What I'm talking about is the version of Ikari Warriors that came out in America. The American Ikari Warriors, coded by the completely unknown Quicksilver Software, well, it's certainly different to Elite's version, isn't it? Mainly in the sense that it looks like it was knocked up in 10 minutes. The enemies flying about all over the place give the impression of a game far from finished, as does the very basic music. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that a decent coder could have knocked up something close to this in a lunch break. Especially because everything is so truncated. Seriously, there's about 2 minutes of actual game here, if that. The final giant Viet Cong soldier at the end doesn't even bloody do anything. Look, I've seen better and fuller productions created with the bloody shoot-'em-up construction kit. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if that's what was used to make this. The effort here is just embarrassing, and that's only compounded by Elite's version, which is one of the system's greatest and most authentic ports. Terrible. Another American abomination comes in the shape of Bionic Commando. Again, most C64 owners will be familiar with the European version from Software Creations. It's pretty damn okay with speedy action-packed gameplay and an awesome Tim Follin soundtrack. Now sure, it's not as good as the Specky version, but still worth anyone's time. But this American version? It's awful. If you watched the last video, then I believe that it's by Pacific Dataworks, the same folks who did that awful American port of the original Street Fighter that made Tear-Tex's version look good by comparison. Once again, god-awful music. Even more pronounced because it has to compete with Follin, which is like sticking boxing gloves on Stephen Hawking and putting him in the ring with Mike Tyson. The most amusing thing is that in a game that's based so much around swinging with your grappling hook, the US Bionic Commando doesn't let you swing at all. The hook does not work properly. Even using it diagonally, you just climb up with the hook fixed in place and totally defying gravity. The whole wicked and ghastly botch job feels like those in charge of the port never actually played the original game and were instead working off a child's drawing of it. Embarrassing. Say what you will about US Gold, but at least they got Software Creations in to do a version of the game. Otherwise us Brits could well have ended up with this load of gubbins. Right, we've done quite a lot of C64 games in this episode, I'm sure you'll agree, so let's move on to something else. Track and Field is, you have to say, one of the most iconic arcades of all time. The sound of buttons being hammered to hell could fill up just about any arcade. It's simple enough that it was easy to recreate in the home too, and Ocean were the ones to really pull it off. At least, unofficially. Daley Thompson's Decathlon was one of their biggest early hits, and it was essentially Track and Field in all but name. Soon after they got an official license from Konami, which they used for an awesome version of Track and Field's sequel, Hyper Sports, courtesy of ZX Spectrum coding god Joffa Smith. All is well. But what of the original Track and Field? It turns out Ocean actually released that too, in 1988, although it is very obscure indeed, and for good reason. Ocean buried the bloody thing so hard that you would have struggled to find it back then. This version is, well, it's pathetic. There's almost no sound. In fact, the only sound you get is when you commit a foul. The graphics and animation are very ropey. Just look at this ridiculous excuse for a hammer throw. The high jump is just completely off. Sometimes you'll have cleared the bar by a great distance, but it'll still fall off anyway. Mind you, you'll be thankful for that if you want to keep playing for some reason, because the high jump is the last event, and the moment you actually clear that bar, this happens. The game crashes to basic. No word of a lie, that's it, game's done, every time. I think it's fair to say that this version of Track and Field is completely unfinished. It feels like a prototype even, something knocked up in 10 minutes as a proof of concept. Yet while it was commercially released, it was only in the loosest sense of the word. It was never a standalone title. This came out as an exclusive on Ocean's Game Set and Match 2 compilation on the 4th tape. You've got 9 other titles in the package, ranging from classics like Matchday 2 and Super Hang-On to a load more so-so titles and, ultimately, this load of pants. Was this some sort of contractual obligation release? Did Ocean have to make an agreement with Konami to release a version of this game, despite having already done Daley Thompson's Decathlon? Maybe because of that, seeing as it was such a blatant if brilliant rip-off of the Konami original? Who knows? As dreadful as this is, it's more of an intriguing curio than something to be retroactively shocked at. We're going to finish with a couple of titles from the Amiga. These may not be quite as awful as some of the games that we've seen, but they're certainly pretty terrible. Just because the computer's more powerful sure doesn't mean that the ports are any better. How's about a bit of Thunderblade? I absolutely love this game in the arcade. It's one of my favourite Sega scaler games. And of course, that incredible scaling, in particular the zooming in and out as you climb and descend, makes an accurate home conversion all but impossible. Not even the Mega Drive could really manage it, although I do kind of have a soft spot for its take on the game. So, how do you think the home computers fared? Especially given that the ports were handled by the terrifying tag team of US Gold and they who make mortals tremble, the much feared Tiertex. I think you already know the answer. Most of these home computer conversions are terrible and are much the same as each other, but the Amiga one gets singled out because, well, it's the one that'd have stunned you for the most cash if you had the misfortune to buy it. The true genius of this port lies in that both firing and speed are controlled with one button. And by genius I mean complete madness. You may wonder just how that works, and the answer is quite obvious. It bloody doesn't. Forget about trying to change altitude in order to dodge any bullets. Doing so means that you stop moving and you get killed. Your best bet is to just hold the fire button down and hope for the best. You'll be limited to a single altitude, mind you, so hopefully you're good at just dodging to the left and right. I don't know what the hell went through Tiertex's mind with this control scheme. Why not use the spacebar for altitude or something? That's not bad. Just put the joystick in front of the keyboard and there you go. Anything would be better than whatever this conversion tried to do. And as mentioned, an accurate conversion of this game would have been very difficult, but even still you have to marvel at how Tiertex managed to get the game so very, very wrong. Finally, here's something that should be an easy win. Renegade. I mean, it's arguably a more iconic game on the Great British Home Computer than it is anywhere else, in particular thanks to its legendary version on the Spectrum and also pretty okay versions on Amstrad and C64, not to mention its sequels like Target Renegade and Target Renegade. It's not exactly a complex game. Here's a group of enemies, now beat the crap out of them. What more is there? Easy, huh? Surely a the Amiga, with Ocean's label Imagine doing the publishing and Software Creations on coding, will be able to do an even more brilliant job than the 8-bit micros did. Right? No, wrong. So very wrong. So wrong in fact that the end result isn't too far off from being as bad as Renegade 3, which is not something I would say lightly. Software Creations are not an all-time great studio or anything like that, but they often did perfectly decent work on computers. However, I really don't know what happened here. It feels like they were kidnapped by Tiertex or Canvas or some other horrid studio and they made this conversion instead. It gets everything wrong. How is it so jerky and choppy in movement? The controls are stupid. The up diagonals do frickin' downed punches and they even do them when you're not over a downed enemy. I hope you enjoy doing those accidentally and getting hit loads as a result. The graphics are ridiculous, sound effects are comedic, and even Tim Follin's music isn't much cop. I mean, you know the game's terrible when someone who used to compose his frickin' best music for shit games can't do anything to salvage this. This is an absolute shocker. How do you screw something as simple as Renegade up so badly? That, my friends, is a mystery. A three-pipe problem, as Sherlock Holmes might say. Utterly befuddling and completely cack. Well, that should do it for this time around. I think I can just about stretch to another video of obscure, weird and mostly quite bad microcomputer ports, you know. Perhaps even more than that. Whenever you think you may well have seen them all, something else will come up that just boggles the mind. And it's not necessarily always something terrible, just intriguing. Perhaps the next selection might include a couple of more hidden gems. But until then, it's time to put this one in the books and say, as always, bye for now. Thanks so much for watching this video. Now before we get to the usual stuff, I'd like to put a quick special thank you in once again to Zeustaz. His Shit Game Time series is frankly full of these really terrible obscure arcade ports to the computers and some more stuff, and I did get quite a fair bit of inspiration from that series for this video, so I do want to thank him and say that you should check him out. There's also some other channels if you want to check out some other really crappy arcade ports and have a good laugh at them with some good personalities. You should perhaps also check out Mamemeister, Old Style Gaming, Bazza H, and a good long play channel as well, Al82. These are all good stuff, and I do admit to using them a fair bit for videos like this one, at least certainly for inspiration, so just paying it forward a bit. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please check out my social media. Please do like it, subscribe to the channel, all that good YouTube stuff, and also for some exclusive content, including wrestling documentaries and various other things, perhaps you'd like to look at my Patreon. You could join this list of awesome people here: Alexa Jones Gonzalez, Andrew Dalton, Andy Cat, Arcade LY Webmaster, Asobi Kwan DX, Brian Henniger, Chris, Conrad Pritchard, D. Zelior, Rimwan Sutter, Dagorath Dungeon Keeper, Dave Cork, David Rose, Dustin Cooper, Gary Samaden, Geordie Alex, Glunafev, J.S. Manchild, James Brown, Jace Alexander, Jeff Ladd, Mateus Gramzov, Martin Pataki, Nate Milbank, Piotr Margel, Ren Bimon, Rusty Kelly, Seth Robinson, Simon Gulliver, Stuart Christopher, Tariq Amir, Tim Wald, Yerka Operator, and to all the rest of my very glorious and very, very awesome community. Thank you so much and goodbye!